the aftermath of the horrific World War I, which we can only but imagine. Australian soldiers returned physically and emotionally traumatised, and they were given graves, but in the gravestones. But in the midst of the last century, it was deemed by the Anzac Office that was too costly to maintain, and a lot of them were smashed, and only tiny little tin plates were put up to signify where they were, if at all. So this was stopped eventually in the 70s when the Office of Australian War Graves took over. Chaplain Major Geoffrey Traill, who's here today for the Defence Force, is heading up a pilot project in Victoria. There's already one in Adelaide and Tasmania to restore the headstones of soldiers. And one of the first places is the Queenscliff Cemetery, and then they hope to expand throughout Victoria. So without further ado, I will introduce Chaplain Geoffrey Traill. Thank you, Geoffrey.
Look, I really wanted to say thank you for the invitation to come and speak with you this morning. And I want to thank Diana Sawyer and Steve Lee. Particularly, I've known Steve for quite a while. We used to sail together, and then I used to come home and write a sermon after I'd been out winning a race with Steve. I used to be the parish priest here at Point Lonsdale and at St George's, Queenscliff. I want to thank we've got some relatives here of some of the soldiers that are buried at Queenscliff, particularly Melissa Duncan, who's the great-grandniece of one of the soldiers we're going to be talking about. And so it's very significant that you're able to come, and we're beginning a journey together to have them remembered and commemorated. The Mayor of Queenscliff, Isabel Tolhurst, was hoping to be here. Is she here? Yes, hello, thank you for coming, that's terrific. We've got apologies from the state member for the Ballerine, Alison Marchant, who was really wanting to be here, but she's been called to other business. So but she's very supportive, and she was sad that she was not able to attend today. So we're going to begin, as Mary Lou has said, we've decided to have Queenscliff as a pilot project. I thought that would be a nice thing to do, because I know Queenscliff loves to be at the forefront of things, and there's lots of instances of that over time. There are two other people before I start that I'd like to welcome and introduce. One is Lambus Iglesias, who's sitting over here. Where are you, Lambus? There he is. Lambus was responsible for helping to find 250 soldiers in unmarked graves in a mass grave in Fromell, you might remember, and he badgered the authorities to get them exhumed and to have them buried properly, and they're now in a cemetery there. And Mike O'Brien, some of you, Major General Mike O'Brien, retired, you might know, was involved in that as well. So it's terrific to see you here. Thank you, Lambus, for coming. And also Gary Snowden from Ballarat, who's been doing this sort of work in Ballarat for some time, so it's great to have you here. So let's begin. As Mary Lou has said, the Queenscliff Historical Museum has been at the forefront of this project, and it's really through their encouragement, through Diana's encouragement, that this began last year, around the middle of last year. And the research, I'll go into a bit later what the research material is that they've provided, and the support that I've received. We've also had tremendous support from the Fort Queenscliff Heritage Association, and we've got quite a few people who are on that part of that museum have stepped up to become committee members for the Headstone Project. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but without them, without both the Historical Museum and the fort, the Headstone Project in Victoria would not have come about. Certainly not this year anyway. So as Mary Lou said, I'm a chaplain, I'm an army chaplain. I'm sort of semi-retired, and I work 3 days a week. I work for the Director General of Chaplaincy in Canberra. It's my main job as a staff officer, and I work at pastoral. I put in a pastoral day each week at Victoria Barracks, where I've got an office there. Colonel Bruce Murray is the Vice President of the Headstone Project. Dr. Bob Marmion here is our Secretary. He's going to be speaking towards the end of the presentation. And Saran is our Senior Research Officer, and she's on the Executive Committee. So thank you for being here, Saran. That's terrific. So there we are. That's me in all my glory. There with Jim Cosgrove. He was my supervisor when I was in Townsville. And so we've been to a few openings of things together. I've been researching the Queenscliff Cemetery for about 8 months, and that's been with a view to commemorate the lives of those who have served in the Defence Force, and also people who have supported members of the Defence Force. So I wanted today to talk about two people, a soldier and someone who trained as a nurse, provided just an extraordinary service to families back here in Australia. We're going to be looking at people who are buried in unmarked graves, or what we call tin plate soldiers. So we've got a little marker. Their grave has been bulldozed basically, and all that's left is a little tin plate that you can be mown over, and often the plates disappear under all the lawn clippings. But the main thing for me is that we are here to honour the men and women who have served, and it's about finding their families, their relatives, and reconnecting them to those who have served. Some of the graves we've been researching. The ones in orange are the tin plate soldiers here in the artillery section, which is up on the hill on the left. The ones in green have a headstone. The blue ones, the Queenscliff Cemetery Trust has all the details are wrong. We've got to correct those. The yellow ones are unmarked graves that are not service personnel. So we're going to look at a short video to start off.
The Headstone Project has marked the graves of hundreds of soldiers around Tasmania and is now looking to continue its work on the mainland. Today, the Governor-General was in Launceston inspecting new headstones for soldiers who died 100 years ago.
A former soldier recognising the service of other military men. Outgoing Governor-General Sir Peter Cosgrove inspected newly marked graves of World War I veterans in Launceston.
As a soldier, you look at what the community is doing all this time after the event, and it makes you quietly proud to be an Aussie.
The volunteer-led Headstone Project has so far commemorated an estimated 70 unmarked soldiers' graves at the Carvilla Cemetery. It's already marked more than 300 soldiers' graves in southern Tasmania.
We know there are families out there who don't know where their relatives are buried. If we go some way towards fixing that problem alone, I think our project has been worthwhile.
Unemployed people taking part in the government's Job Active program clean and concrete the graves and erect headstones.
Like I said, they love it and they get right behind it. You know, these guys serve, they deserve to be remembered.
The federal government recently announced funding for a pilot project to tackle unmarked veterans' graves around Australia. The Headstone Project wants to help.
We would like to think that by the time Tasmania is essentially done, that there's a process and a machine that we can simply press into action should we be required anywhere else.
But first, there's more work to be done at home, with up to 500 Tasmanian soldiers still waiting to have their final resting place identified. Laura Beavis, ABC News.
So what I'd like to do is to invite you to stand for a moment as we remember those who've served in our nation. We'll just have a moment's silence, and then I'll read part of the ode and we respond at the end lest we forget. They went with songs to battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them. So the first person I'd like to talk about is Private William Charles Dunk, better known as Billy Dunk. And so he's buried here in an unmarked grave. He was actually the first soldier that I found, and he is also noted as someone without a headstone in the Queenscliff Historical Museum records as well. So that was very interesting to see that. So I want to talk a little bit about him. He was born in Port Albert, and his father, Frank Dunk, was a lighthouse keeper. And you can see the list of the lighthouses there that his father served in. He was 2 years old when the family came to Point Lonsdale, and his father became responsible for manning the light, which was really just a lamp, an oil lamp on a cross beam out there where the current lighthouse stands. So he went to the Point Lonsdale Primary School, Billy, and his name is on the memorial. As you go out the door here, you'll look up and you'll see the war memorial, and his name is noted there. So, a couple of things. William's father, Frank, built the terminus. And many of you will have seen that or have been to a function there. And that was built in 1884. It was built to house 12 children. So I'm not sure what I can say about that. He probably had a little bit of time on his hands. So it was Frank's daughter, Rosina Ward, who took on guests at the boarding house there in 1902 when that lighthouse there, as it currently stands, was built. That was without all the wraparound at the bottom. That was established in 1902. So prior to enlisting in the AIF, Billy Dunk served in the Royal Navy on board HMS Katoomba. He had 3 years in the Victorian Navy and 2 years in the Australian Navy, or the Royal Navy, as a second-class stoker. And you can see his attestation papers there. From 1906, Billy came back to Queenscliff and he worked as a fisherman and lived in Queenscliff. And one of his mates, who was also born at Port Albert, George Martin, so Billy was living in a boarding house that George and his wife were running in Hesse Street. And their great-grandson, Graham Clifford Martin, hoped to be here today, but he's not been well enough. He's up in Ballarat. And his son Peter, was hoping to be here as well. But Melissa's here, so thank you, Melissa. So we can see that Billy, as part of his attestation, he was 36 years old when he joined up and became part of the 22nd Battalion, the 11th Reinforcements. And we'll just flip through this. He sailed on the Orontes, which is interesting. He sailed from Melbourne on the Orontes. That was the same ship that some of my family came out from England as 10-pound passage bombs on many, many years later. So it was a fascinating connection. Off he went to war, and the 22nd Battalion at the beginning of, in 1916, was at Pozieres. This was before Billy joined them. Between the 25th of July and the 7th of August, just a period of 2 weeks, killed were 27 officers and 656 other ranks were killed or wounded in that 2-week period at Pozieres. It was just a devastating battle. Billy joined them in the October in 1916 when they moved to Ypres. And then they went to the Somme for the winter. How would that be? After this, the battalion spent the next 2.5 years rotating through the trenches. And I've got some slides here of some of that experience that Billy was involved in. So this was at Pozieres. They were sent out to establish this trench line in the trees. And then this is what it looked like afterwards. Being blown to smithereens by artillery, and their job was to repair the trenches. They then were put on buses, interesting vehicles there, and they went off through to Belgium to the Hindenburg line. You can imagine, that would have been a very difficult environment as well. And you can imagine digging the trenches there amongst the tree roots in the tree line as well. Just really hard graft. That's why I think they call a lot of soldiers grunts because of the work they do. So just moving on quickly, the battalion then went off to Bullecourt to Broodseiden, and then the second battle of Bullecourt. They got bogged down in trench warfare for 1917, and in May 1917 Billy Dunk was wounded. He received a gunshot wound to the head, and he was sent off to hospital. So this is some of the slides of the conditions. You can see a soldier sleeping there in the trenches, firing at an aircraft. That's a famous photo. And then this is Billy headed off to the 12th General Hospital in Rouen, where he was for a number of weeks. He was discharged 3 weeks later and went back to fight, which is extraordinary. And the battalion then moved north Belgium to the 3rd Ypres offensive. They took on the Battle of Menin Road, and it was there that Billy was wounded again. He received a shrapnel wound to his wrist at West Hoek Ridge in Belgium, and again he spent 6 weeks this time in hospital. This is Menin Road. And so Billy was fortunate to, in some ways, to be out of the lines during that period. But he saw action then at Hamel, at Amiens, at Mount St Quentin, and at Mount Brehan. And then they were sort of in resting mode when armistice was called on the 11th of November 1918. The guns of the Western Front fell silent. So casualties for the 22nd, there were 854 men killed, 2,378 wounded. Billy came home the following year, about a month before his 40th birthday. And we can see a slide of him here. He's in this group photo. He's somewhere there in the middle, down near the front, and you can see his name there. 420, Private William Charles Dunk. Came back to Queenscliff and went fishing again. And as I said, you can see his name, the War Memorial Board here at the school, as a student here, and also at the Methodist Church Honour Roll. He lived in Hobson Street for a while and Simmons Road in Queenscliff. He never married, and he died 30 years later, and he's buried in an unmarked grave here at Point Lonsdale. That's his grave. He was 70 years old when he died. Now, the second person I want to talk about who wasn't a soldier was someone who was responsible for providing an extraordinary support and comfort and solace to thousands of Australian families in their time of grief during both the First and the Second World Wars. And some of you may know of her, some of you may actually have known her. Her name was Lady Vera White, Vera Deacon White, born in 1891 and died in 1971. She was the youngest of three daughters born to Patty and Alfred Deakin. Alfred Deakin was our second Prime Minister of Australia. He served during 1903 and 1910. And Vera was in London when the First World War broke out. She came home to join the Red Cross. She wanted to do something. She joined the Red Cross to complete a nursing course. She wanted to do some war work, and then she made contact with a relative of hers, a distant relative, and he was the Red Cross Commissioner in Cairo. Now, he encouraged her to come across to Egypt against her parents' wishes, and she left Australia with her friend Winifred Johnson. And on the 21st of October 1915, at the age of 23, the day after she arrived, she set up the Australian Wounded and Missing Inquiry Bureau in Cairo, and with herself as secretary and Johnson as the assistant secretary. The Bureau organised searches to visit hospitals and base camps to find out the details about those who were missing and those who were dead. And other volunteers reported on wounded soldiers in hospitals. And the Bureau sent the findings from these witness statements to thousands of distressed relatives who were getting very little information from the military, the Australian military. So this is the group in Cairo when it was established, and it grew, obviously, after the campaign at Gallipoli. There was so much information that was needed. Vera said at the time about her dealings with the army, they were frequently tested. She said, we were often met with suspicion and eventually jealousy, as we made ourselves felt as a court of appeal to relatives who were unsuccessful in obtaining satisfaction from the military authorities. And so you can see some of the correspondence. This is one, this has actually got Vera's signature on it. And she was responsible as a secretary for overseeing more than 400,000 pieces of correspondence during her time as the secretary. A lot of other people were typing these up, and she was signing them, and took that responsibility. They had a team of forensic clerical detectives. They wrote thousands of letters. They interviewed thousands of eyewitnesses who were the last to see the missing soldiers. And occasionally those people who were listed as missing were found recuperating in hospitals or captured as prisoners of war, but most of the letters informed the families that the soldier had died and that these were the circumstances in which he died, from an eyewitness account. So here are some of the letters. This is how it's recorded these days, so you can get it through the National Australian Archives. And this is an example of one of the card files. I knew that Captain Charles Linklater was wounded and then taken prisoner during the attack on June the 7th, and he was reported as missing. I believe he is now in England, wounded. I heard through the Red Cross that he had died of wounds in Germany. But no, it looks like he's got married. Again, another card about B.J. Winter. He was a country boy from Victoria. He was a farmer, one of the 22nd Battalion. He was with the battalion when I left on the 3rd of October, then at Bullecourt. We were holding our line. A small German raiding party came over and raided us in the morning, and Winter was on sentry duty. A German officer shot him through the chest with his revolver. We killed all the raiders except one, but he died. So after being at Cairo, Vera went off to London and was again the secretary for the Bureau for the Red Cross. This is their work, the card file system in London. And you can see some of the card files there, thousands and thousands of them. And this is Vera again. She was the Anzac Fellowship of Women of Victoria from 1935. She was made the Life Member of the Red Cross in 1945, having served as the Victorian Divisional Commander. She went on to serve as the National Vice Chairman in 1945, and then later was the Vice Chairman of the Red Cross in London when her husband, after she married in 1920 to Thomas Walter White. He was a pilot, a famous pilot from the Army Aviation Corps. He was appointed as the Australian High Commissioner to the United Kingdom in 1949, and in 1952 he was knighted, and so Vera became Lady White. Sadly, 5 years later he died. and is buried here at Point Lonsdale. But after she was widowed, she became a member of the Red Cross Welfare Service. She was the first chairman of the Committee for Music and Mental Hospitals. She was well known in Point Lonsdale. She was often here for the summer down at Ballara on the corner of Gallinoos and Kirk Road. This is where she's buried, next to her husband. You can see in the yellow there, she's in an unmarked grave. But her name is on her husband's grave, and it simply reads Vera Deacon White, OBE. She's of the Order of St John of Jerusalem of Knights Hospitaller, born 25th of December 1891, died 9th of August 1978. Now the Headstone Project has been talking with Judith, her daughter, and their grandson Tom about commemorating Vera's extraordinary contribution and her service. That conversation's just begun, and I've got permission from the family to let you know that that's begun. We're not sure how that's going to happen or what's required, but I think it's someone who is very fittingly deserves some recognition for her service. All right, so I've talked about our situation. I'm doing a Soldiers 5. What's our situation? What's the mission? How are we going to execute it? What's the administration? How are we going to have communication? Okay, so that's a regular Soldiers 5. Bob's going to do the last two, but I've got 2 more to go. So the mission. The mission is to mark the graves of our veterans at no cost to the family. We want to bring the borough of Queenscliff together to find and honour our dirt soldiers, to remember their service, to mark their graves at their point of burial, but most importantly, to reconnect them to their families. So, in the last 8 months, I've done the research, about 2/3 of the way through the research for the cemetery. I've found 536 veterans that are associated with Queenscliff. 139 are buried overseas or interstate, many of them killed in action. 397 are buried at Queenscliff, at Point Lonsdale, in the Queenscliff Cemetery. And of those, 31 that I've found are in unmarked graves. We've also, of those 31, we've got 16 what we call tin plate soldiers. And these are people who died whilst on active service here at Fort Queenscliff between 1887 and 1926. Now, sometime I think in the 90s, those graves were bulldozed for maintenance reasons, and in the artillery section they were replaced with a tin plate. As Lambers says, I'll quote him, "They volunteered, put on a uniform and served, and that should be sufficient to have them properly recognised where they lie. They are entitled to identity and dignity, all of them." And one of the things we've been saying is, yes, let's change "yes, we forget" to "lest we forget." And these, as I've put up before, these are the graves, and this is what they used to look like. And our hope is to have them recommissioned back to this state, but this is what they look like now. They're just little tin plates. We've had 2 of them who have been restored by the Office of the Australian War Graves. So we've got a verbal agreement that they will restore these graves. So that would be amazing. How did we find them? I just want to spend a moment just talking, because I know you're interested in history. How did we find them? We went to the Geelong Cemetery Trust and they said, well, we can't give you any information until you've got a name for privacy reasons. So that was a bit disappointing. I came back to the Queenscliff Historical Museum and they said, well, we've got a list from the Sentinel newspaper for 1917. We've got the Queenscliff Cemetery burial records up to 1975. They're just here. If you want to have a look through them, here's a copy. And they also gave us maps of the Queenscliff Cemetery with all the names on them. So, thank you, Diana, and others for your support. We then began to research the names by cross-matching from the newspaper and the Queenscliff burial with the Queenscliff Burial Register, and we checked each name in the burial register against the cemetery maps. And then when we had a name, we were able to go back to the Geelong Cemeteries Trust and say, okay, where are they? And they've actually they gave us access to satellite maps that show where they are. We cross-referenced all of them against the National Australian Archives, so 536 soldiers' records were looked up, and we then began to walk the cemetery. Once we identified who the soldiers were, we checked the unmarked graves on a map, we confirmed their military service record, we checked for the DVA website for their commemoration, and we've begun to write the soldiers' stories. So I've got about 5 stories written so far. We've got a few more to go, and we need help if you want to be involved in that. If you can help find the relatives, that would be fantastic. Now, if I had time, I was going to show you all the websites, but we're meeting in a couple of weeks. The Wednesday after Easter, we're meeting at the Geelong RSL. If you want to come along and learn how to help and be involved, there's meeting times I'll put up later. But I was going to show you all, if I had the time, I'd show you these. But anyway, we'll move on. So why are they in unmarked graves? Some of the soldiers are there because of the family's financial circumstances during the Great Depression. And for many families, it was a choice between putting food on the table or putting a headstone on their relative's grave. Many of the soldiers had mental health issues, PTSD. They were suffering moral injury from their war service, physical injuries. Many were unemployed during the Depression. Many turned to alcohol. There was significant domestic violence, I think. Men were estranged from their families and many suicided. So I know of 3 who suicided that are buried in unmarked graves here at Point Lonsdale. They might have been the last surviving member of their family, and their parents and siblings or spouse or children might have predeceased them. Or the family might have been unaware that you could apply to the Office of the Australian War Graves and get the financial support to put a headstone on. It wasn't an automatic entitlement. So to date, we are following the lead of the Headstone Project Tasmania, which has been going for 10 or 12 years, the Headstone Project in South Australia, and they've provided a lot of information and support. So we've got investigation guides, we've got how to search a cemetery, all sorts of records there. If you want to get involved, we can teach you how to do it. We've had the help of the Historical Museum, the Fort Queenscliff Heritage Association, and it happens I was invited to be a member of the War Graves Working Group for Victoria. So that's been fantastic. We're going to my second meeting on Tuesday. The Geelong Cemeteries Trust, we need to begin a conversation, an earnest conversation with them. We need to begin a conversation with the RSL in Queenscliff and Ocean Grove because we need your help. Our work is to support the work of the Office of the Australian War Graves and the Department of Veterans Affairs. And so those conversations have begun. And as I said, Alison Marchant and Natalie Suleiman, who's the Minister for Veterans Affairs in Victoria, we've begun a conversation with them, and Alison particularly is really on board. Her mum used to work for the Geelong Cemeteries Trust, and she spent her childhood walking cemeteries all around Geelong because her mum wrote a number of books. So she knows the deal, and she's very excited. So, Bob, come and talk to us.
Thanks, Jeff. Look, Jeff's spoken about the need for Headstone, and our reason for being is to remember and veterans. So what I'd like to talk about is perhaps the administrative side of how we're doing it. Headstone Victoria is part of a national organisation. As Jeff said, there's an organisation in Tasmania and also South Australia, and possibly another one forming up in Queensland. So this is becoming a national concern. So in Victoria, we're an incorporated organisation under Victorian law. We're also registered with the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission. We have an ABN, an Australian Business Number, and we're also applied for, I always get this wrong, deductible gift recipient. So ideally, if anybody would like to make a donation, it will become tax deductible. Now that's in the pipeline at the moment. So what is the role of Headstone Victoria? Essentially, it's an overarching body which provides support to local communities and helps facilitate local action. It's envisaged that projects across the state will be driven by local communities with the support of the headstone. So, like Jeff said, there's a way of researching. It's not the only way. You know, you're all experienced researchers and involved in historical societies. But for people who are coming in and saying, how do we do this? We can actually offer support and help and say, this is how we've done it in the past. You might want to do it again. And we're finding that already there's interest from right across the state, from Mildura to Ballarat to Port Fairy, and obviously in Geelong, Queenscliff, Point Lonsdale. So it is spreading. As the word gets out, more and more people are coming to us and saying, well, what can we do? And ideally, Headstone Victoria is this overarching organisation which supports local communities, and it's local communities that are driving this with our help and support. An example of that obviously is Point Lonsdale, Queenscliff. Now, this is the pilot project, so we're hoping we get this right. And as Jeff has outlined, there's a lot of work has already been done. We're talking about many, many unmarked graves. So, being the local community, we want your support. So how can you get involved? Well, we need volunteers to research, do genealogy work into deceased veterans. We're looking at finding family members of veterans without a headstone. We want people who can write grant applications, public relations, PR, media, website. We're trying to develop our own. There's a national website, but we also need a Victorian website as well. We need to liaise with the local cemetery trust. Like Jeff said, we need to start talking to the Geelong Cemeteries Trust. I was talking to a lady the other day who's involved with Port Fairy Cemetery, and she's at a conference at the moment of statewide cemeteries trust. So she's promoting what Headstone is all about as a first step to actually dealing with the locals. We need compliance officers. There's all rules and regulations and privacy issues and everything else that we need to comply with. So we need people who are switched on enough to say, okay, let's work with the organisations, not against them. We need people who are physically capable of working on the grave sites, installing the headstones. So there's one aspect, there's the physical, but if you're not physically up to it, that's fine, there's plenty of other jobs. We need to organise the rededication of the grave sites. We need to help with administration. Like at the moment, I'm the secretary of the association, but I'm also the acting treasurer, and I don't want to be treasurer. So if anybody would love to be a treasurer, we'd love to have you on board. So there's plenty of ways to get involved. So how do we get involved? Well, the first thing is obviously join up. It costs $10 a year, which is next to nothing. So we have application forms here. We'd love to have you put your hand up and say, we'd like to be a member. And then what I'm going to do is say, okay, if you want to be a member, I'm going to say, what can you do to help? So I have an application form for various jobs, whether it's genealogy research or administration or physical or whatever, the ones that I've just outlined. So if you want to be just a member and support the project, that's great too. But we're obviously looking for people to get more actively involved. So, where to now? Come and see me and Jeff after the talk and sign up. And then we're organising a meeting the first Wednesday after Easter at the Queenscliff RSL to actually talk about where do we go from here. And then we'll start talking about this is where we're at the moment. A little bit of a rehash of what Jeff was saying, but also this is where we go in the future, and this is where we need your help. So we'll start, if you're showing interest in a particular job, we'll allocate that job to you. So essentially, we're an incorporated association, but we need members and we need help. So if you can be involved, it would be fantastic. There's plenty of ways to get involved.
Thank you, Bob.
Okay.
So if you would like to be involved in being a patron to the Headstone Project, then there's some opportunities to have that conversation as well. And we do have one family that have said that they are interested, but as we said, there's, each grave is going to cost at a minimum about $1,500. That's for a very basic plinth with a plaque on it. And if we're going to go further than that as a community, if you want to help financially, sort of, what do they call, crowdfunding, to help build those resources, or if you're the local RSL and you think that, particular soldiers deserve or, need to have something that is more than a basic plaque, then we would like to have you part of that conversation. So we're taking a step of faith. We're launching today. This is our official launch. We've done the research, some of the research. We've still got a lot more research to go, and we need your help. So thank you very much for coming along, and we hope that we can have this wrapped up, within the next 12 months here for Point Lonsdale, Queenscliff, and we'll move on to Port Arlington and then on to St Leonard's, and we've got 21 other cemeteries here in the Geelong region to begin to work on. So there's a bit of work ahead of us. And then Melbourne, Melbourne's huge. I've already got 1,300 names of soldiers buried around Victoria without a headstone. And, so there's a lot of work to do. Thank you very much.